When I picked up the phone to ask my son Michael when his wedding would be, my daughter-in-law Sarah looked me right in the eye, her lips curling into a smile that cut me deeper than any knife, and said, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." The word slammed into me like a bucket of ice water. Special people. And I was not one of them. I, who for 3 years had quietly paid their rent of $500 a month. I, who had bought every piece of furniture in their tiny apartment, down to the sofa she now reclined on in my own living room as though she owned it. I, who had filled their refrigerator when they had nothing to eat. I, the man who raised the boy sitting beside her, was not special enough. I stood there frozen, the phone heavy in my hand as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. My son wouldn't even look at me. Michael's eyes stayed glued to the floor, shame creeping across his face, while Sarah stretched her arms on the sofa I had paid for, like a queen on her throne. In my closet upstairs hung the dark navy suit I had bought just for his wedding. $200 I had scraped together, telling myself I would look proud and dignified in his wedding photographs. Photographs I would never appear in. I had polished my old black shoes until they shined, ready to walk into that church as a father watching his son become a husband. For weeks, I had been setting aside extra money, planning to give them $1,000 gift to start their new life. I had called my sister Diana in Chicago, her voice brimming with joy when I told her Michael would be marrying soon. She had promised to come down, to be there for the big day. I had cleaned my house from top to bottom, imagining they might come here after the ceremony, cut a cake in the kitchen, raise glasses in the dining room. I pictured family filling these empty rooms with laughs. Otter. All of that collapsed in a second, shattered by 4 poisoned words. Only special people. Finally, Michael lifted his head, and his voice came out low, flat, rehearsed. "Dad, it was an intimate thing, very small. Just the 2 of us and the witnesses." An intimate thing, a son's wedding, and his father shut out, left with nothing but the sound of his wife's last wish echoing in his ears. "Take care of our boy, Richard. Before I go on, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from, because this story doesn't end with humiliation. This story ends with revenge." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark at my kitchen table, staring at the empty glass in front of me, replaying those words again and again. Special people. What had I done all these years, if not treat my son as the most special person in the world? When his mother was dying, she held my hand in that hospital bed, her voice weak but steady. "Richard, promise me you'll take care of Michael. No matter what, protect him. Don't let him fall." I swore it to her with tears streaming down my face. I swore I would live for him when she was gone. And I did. I worked double shifts at the factory, hands raw and aching, just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. I skipped meals so he could eat more. When his classmates showed off expensive sneakers, I saved every spare dollar until I could buy him a pair, just so he wouldn't feel left out. I packed his lunches, sat through his school plays, stood cheering at his football games. Every sacrifice was worth it, because he was my son. When he struggled in college, I told him not to worry. I paid his bills, covered his rent when his part-time jobs couldn't stretch far enough. When he and Sarah moved in together, I didn't question it. I supported them, quietly slipping cash into his hand, buying them furniture, stocking their fridge when I saw the shelves bare. I thought I was helping them build a future. There were nights I'd come home bone-tired, my shirt soaked in sweat, my back screaming from lifting steel. But when I saw Michael smile, when I heard him laugh, it was enough. I told myself it was worth it. Every hour of my life was worth it if it gave him a better one. And now? Now he sat beside a woman who looked at me like I was disposable, and he let her words cut me down without a fight. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He just stared at the floor, silent, complicit. I thought of my wife again that night. I whispered into the darkness, "I promised you love. I promised I'd protect him. But who's going to protect me from him?" The silence that answered was heavier than the grave she lay in. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Michael would call me every week, just to ask how I was doing. We'd watch football games together, grill steaks in the backyard, and talk late into the night. I wasn't just his father back then. I was his best friend. But everything started to change the day he introduced me to Sarah. I remember shaking her hand, and for the first time. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She scanned my small house with a glance that lingered too long, as if she were judging every corner, every piece of furniture, every sign of my modest life. She said all the right things, but her voice carried a sharp edge, a subtle mockery beneath the politeness. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just being protective. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, Michael began to drift. Our phone calls grew shorter. His visits became less frequent. And when he did come by, Sarah was always with him, her presence like a wall between us. I'd ask Michael to help me fix something around the house, like we used to, and Sarah would sigh, roll her eyes, and say, "We don't have time for that." And he would nod, almost apologetically, and leave with her. I could see him slipping further from me, one step at a time. I noticed the way she whispered to him when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she smirked when I told stories about his childhood, as though my memories were something to laugh at. Once, when I mentioned how proud I was of him finishing a project at work, she said, "Well, he wouldn't have made it without me." Her hand clutched his arm possessively, and he just smiled, letting her words erase mine. It was like watching my son disappear in slow motion. The boy I had raised, the man I had stood by, was being pulled away by her, thread by thread, until all that was left between us was silence. I told myself it was just growing pains, that all sons eventually build their own lives, create their own families, that I shouldn't be selfish. But deep down, I felt it, the cold distance creeping in, the space between us widening with every smirk, every whisper, every visit cut short. And though I tried to convince myself otherwise, a voice in the back of my mind whispered the truth. She didn't just want his love, she wanted to erase mine. The distance didn't just grow, it became a wall so high I could no longer see into my son's world. I wasn't told things directly anymore. Instead, I heard them secondhand, as if I were some distant relative instead of his father. I remember one afternoon when a neighbor stopped me at the grocery store. She smiled and said, "Congratulations, Michael told me he got promoted at work." My chest tightened. Promoted? My own son hadn't even told me. I forced a smile, nodded, and thanked her, but inside I felt like a stranger in my own child's life. Then there was the engagement. I didn't hear it from him. I didn't even hear it from Sarah. I found out when my sister Diana called from Chicago, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Richard, you must be over the moon. Michael told me he's engaged." I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, trying to mask the silence that followed. I hadn't known. I hadn't been trusted with the kind of news a father should hear first. When I finally asked Michael about it, he shrugged. "Yeah, Dad, we didn't want to make a big deal out of it. You know how Sarah is about keeping things private." Private. That was the word he always used when he wanted to cover her tracks. Private. Yet somehow, everyone else I knew before me. Even holidays became quieter. He skipped Thanksgiving one year, calling last minute to say they were spending it with friends. At Christmas they showed up late, Sarah carrying a bottle of wine like a peace offering, her smile sharp as glass. She sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone while Michael handed me a gift card. No thought, no effort, just an obligation checked off a list. I sat in my armchair, staring at the empty seat where his mother used to sit, and felt the weight of loneliness pressing down. Every time I tried to bring it up, Michael brushed me off. "Dad, we're adults now. We don't have to tell you everything." And Sarah would glance at me with that smug look, as if she had won some invisible battle I wasn't allowed to fight. The hardest part wasn't just being left out. It was the realization that my son was letting it happen. He was choosing her whispers over my words, her smirk over my smile, her world over the home I had built for him. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was exclusion, deliberate, sharp, and cruel. And each time I was shut out, a small piece of me broke away, until all that was left was the faint echo of a father who had once been everything to his son. I couldn't keep swallowing it anymore. The secrecy, the half-truths, the way I had to hear about my own son's life from neighbors and relatives while he sat across from me, silent. One evening I asked him to come over alone, just him and me. I wanted to talk without Sarah's sharp tongue slicing through every word. He showed up late, hands in his pockets, looking tired but distant. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd once done his homework, while I brewed coffee and encouraged him through late nights of studying. Now he sat with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the wall. "Michael," I began carefully, "why is it that I'm always the last to know what's going on in your life? Why didn't you tell me about the engagement? Why didn't you tell me about the promotion? I shouldn't have to hear these things from strangers." He sighed, leaned back in his chair, and rubbed his temples like he was the one carrying the burden. "Dad, it's not that serious. We just don't think we need to update you on every little detail. We're adults now. We have our own life." "Your own life?" I snapped, my voice breaking before I could stop it. "I'm not asking for daily reports. I'm your father. I'm supposed to be part of these moments, Michael. I raised you. I sacrificed for you. And now I feel like I'm just—" My words caught in my throat. Just an afterthought. For a moment, I thought I saw guilt flicker in his eyes, but then he shook his head. "Sarah doesn't like to share things until they're official. She's private. You have to respect that." Private. That cursed word again, like a wall slammed between us. I clenched my fists under the table, biting back the words I wanted to say about her. But then, as if on cue, the front door opened, and Sarah walked in, her heels clicking across the floor. She glanced at us, then smirked. "What's going on here? Dad giving you the third D. Eagery again?" Michael didn't defend me. He chuckled softly, almost apologetically, and said, "It's nothing, Sarah. Just Dad being Dad. Just Dad being Dad." The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. It reduced every sacrifice I'd made, every promise I'd kept, to nothing more than a nuisance. Sarah leaned against the counter, her arms folded, that smug smile fixed on her lips. "You need to understand, Richard. We're building our life together now. You had your time. Let us have ours." And Michael nodded. He nodded. The days after their so-called wedding felt like walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Every corner of my house reminded me of what I had prepared, of the celebration that was supposed to be. In my closet, the navy suit still hung neatly pressed, tags still attached. Beside it, the black shoes I had polished until they gleamed sat waiting in their box, untouched. On my dresser, the envelope with $1,000 in cash still lay hidden beneath a stack of bills, meant to be handed over with pride as a father's blessing. All of it useless now. I remembered the weeks leading up to that day, how I had told my sister Diana the good news, her voice bubbling with excitement over the phone. "I'll take the train down, Richard," she had said. "We'll make it a family affair." I could still hear the joy in her tone, and the crushing silence I gave her later when she asked how the wedding went. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, that her own nephew had married without his family by his side, without even a father's presence to witness the vows. I had cleaned this house top to bottom in anticipation, scrubbed the floors until my knees ached, polished the silverware, even bought new curtains for the dining room because I imagined them coming here after the ceremony. I saw it so clearly in my mind, Sarah in her gown, Michael beaming, relatives gathering, laughter filling these empty rooms. Instead, I came home to silence, to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the echo of betrayal in my chest. Neighbors asked me when the big day was. A coworker clapped me on the back, grinning, and said, "Bet you're one proud father, huh? When's the wedding?" Each question was a knife twisting deeper. I smiled, I lied, I said, "Soon." Because what else could I say? That my son had married behind my back and declared I wasn't special enough to witness it? That the suit in my closet and the envelope on my dresser were monuments to a dream I was never invited to? The pale pink dress I had picked out for Sarah hung in my closet too. I had chosen it carefully, thinking it would flatter her, that she'd look radiant in it. I had imagined her walking down the aisle, my son waiting nervously, and me sitting in the front row with tears of pride in my eyes. That dress would never be worn. It was just another reminder of how thoroughly I had been cut out. I sat in my armchair that night, staring at the empty living room, feeling like a fool. All the effort, all the hope, all the love I had poured into preparing for a day that never came, it collapsed with 4 poisoned words. Only special people. And I realized then, with a hollow ache in my chest, that I had been erased from my son's life, not by accident, but by design. It didn't take long after the wedding for Sarah to drop whatever mask of politeness she once wore. She had won, and she wanted me to know it. The smirks that used to be subtle became bolder. The words that used to be whispered became louder, sharper, aimed straight at me like darts. One Sunday afternoon, they came over unannounced. Sarah made herself comfortable on the sofa, legs crossed, scrolling on her phone while Michael sat stiffly beside her. I offered them coffee, like I always did, trying to cling to some shred of family warmth. She looked up from her screen and said, "No thanks, we'll get something real later." Her tone was sweet, but the sting underneath it made Michael shift uncomfortably. Later, when the conversation turned to finances, she leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "You know, Richard, you're lucky we don't expect you to support us anymore." Michael and I can manage just fine on our own now. You can keep your pension for yourself. She said it with a smile, but her meaning was clear. We don't need you anymore. Michael didn't say a word. He just nodded slightly, as if her cruelty was truth. Once, when I tried to share a memory of Michael's childhood, how he used to run around the backyard with his toy truck, his mother laughing as she chased him, Sarah laughed, actually laughed right in my face. That's ancient history, she said. Why do old people always live in the past? My chest tightened, and I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me. He didn't. He just looked away, embarrassed, as if her words were his own. But the worst moment came one evening when they came by for dinner. I had cooked roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, Michael's favorite when he was a boy. I thought maybe it would remind him of home, of family. Sarah took one bite, set down her fork, and said, "It's a little dry, don't you think, Michael?" She smiled sweetly, but her eyes were cruel. Michael shrugged, muttered, "Yeah, maybe a bit." I sat there, hands trembling under the table, forcing myself not to explode. I had cooked with love, trying to bridge the gap, and they tore it apart with a laugh. I realized then that my own home was no longer mine. They walked in like conquerors, treating me like a guest in the life I had built. Every word Sarah spoke chipped away at my dignity, and every silence from Michael told me he had chosen her side completely. That night, as I washed the dishes alone, the house echoing with their laughter upstairs, I whispered to myself, "She wants to erase me, and he's letting her." The night after that dinner, I couldn't bear the silence of the house. Every corner seemed to echo with Sarah's laughter, with Michael's silence, with my own humiliation. I grabbed my coat and walked through the dark streets until I reached the cemetery. The wind was sharp, the moonlight pale, and I found myself kneeling before the headstone that bore my wife's name. For a long time, I said nothing. I just stared at the stone, tracing her name with my trembling fingers. The cold seeped into my bones, but I didn't care. Finally, the words spilled out of me. "I promised you I would take care of him," I whispered. My voice cracked, carried away by the wind. I worked myself to the bone to keep that promise. I sacrificed everything, but what did it get me? I clenched my fists in the dirt. "He's gone, love. Not dead, but gone. He's not my boy anymore. He looks at me like I'm a burden, and she mocks me in my own home. I feel like I failed you. I feel like I failed him." The silence pressed down heavy, the only sound the rustling of dry leaves. I thought of all the nights I had stood in this very place, swearing to her memory that I would never give up on our son. But now I was the one being abandoned. A tear slid down my cheek, hot against the cold night air. "Tell me what to do," I begged, though I knew no answer would come. "Tell me how to protect him when he's the one destroying me." I stayed there until my knees ached, until my breath turned to smoke in the freezing air. At last I rose slowly, wiping the tears from my face. As I looked down at her grave one final time, a clarity settled over me. They wanted me to disappear. They wanted to erase me, to reduce me to nothing more than a memory, like the flowers that withered and died at her stone. But I wasn't gone yet. I brushed the dirt from my hands, lifted my chin, and whispered, "If they think they can break me, they're wrong. I may have failed as a protector, but I will not fail in defending myself." As I walked back through the silent streets, a fire burned in my chest. The grief was still there, but it had hardened into something sharper. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, and I decided that night I would show them who I really was. After that night at the cemetery, something inside me shifted. I still carried the pain, but it no longer drowned me. It sharpened me. I started to see things I had ignored before, to hear the edge in Sarah's voice more clearly, to notice the way Michael's silence wasn't just guilt, but agreement. They came over often, but not out of love. Every visit circled back to the same subject, my house. One afternoon, Sarah strolled through the living room, running her fingers across the mantelpiece like an inspector. "This place is nice," she said, glancing at Michael. "Too big for one person, though, don't you think?" Michael shifted uncomfortably, but didn't deny it. I stayed quiet, sipping my coffee, pretending I didn't hear the hunger in her tone. Another time, she sat at my dining table, flipping through the mail I had left there. "Property taxes," she said with a smirk. "Must be hard for you to keep up with, Richard. Maybe one day we'll take this off your hands. Right, Michael?" He chuckled nervously. "Sarah," he muttered, but he didn't tell her to stop. That was when I realized the truth. It wasn't just about cutting me out of the wedding. It wasn't just about humiliating me in my own home. They were waiting for me to die, waiting like vultures circling a carcass, eager for the house, the savings, the life I had built brick by brick. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I was old, weak, blind, but I noticed everything. I started keeping records, dates, times, exact words. I kept a notebook hidden in my desk, filling it with every cruel comment, every greedy hint. I saved bank statements, insurance papers, anything they might try to twist. I was no longer the father, begging for scraps of love. I was the hunter, patient, silent, watching my prey circle closer. Sarah's comments grew bolder. "When you're gone, Richard, this place will finally have some life in it. We'll fix it up, make it modern. Right now it just feels stuck in the past." I smiled, forced a chuckle, and nodded as if I agreed. Inside, my blood boiled. Every word confirmed what I already knew. They weren't just trying to erase me emotionally. They wanted to erase me physically. Michael didn't stop her. He didn't defend me. He sat there nodding, complicit in her vision of my death. And that's when I decided, if they were planning my future without me, then I would start planning theirs without them. The more I listened, the clearer their plan became. They thought time was on their side, that one day I'd collapse quietly, and they'd swoop in to claim everything I had worked for. But they didn't know that I was already 3 steps ahead. I made an appointment with my lawyer, a man I trusted more than anyone else. I brought my notebook, my bank statements, every piece of evidence I had collected of their greed and mockery. He listened carefully, his face hardening as I spoke. Finally, he said, "Richard, you need to protect yourself. If what you're telling me is true, you can't leave anything in your son's hands." So I changed everything, my will, my insurance, my accounts. I cut Michael out entirely. Not a penny, not a brick of this house would ever belong to him or Sarah. Instead, I redirected it all to charity, to causes my wife would have been proud of. My lawyer made sure the paperwork was airtight, impossible to challenge, and I told no one. I left the old documents where they were, in the desk drawer, because I knew Sarah's prying hands would find them. I wanted her to think everything was still in place, that their payday was secure. Meanwhile, the real documents were locked away in a safe deposit box, untouchable. Back at home, I played my part well. I let my shoulders sag lower. I walked slower, groaned louder when I bent to tie my shoes. I let them believe I was fading, a man too tired to fight back. When Sarah made her cruel comments about "when you're gone," I chuckled softly, as if I accepted it. When Michael avoided my eyes, I let him think his silence broke me. But inside, I was sharper than I had been in years. I kept listening, kept writing, kept planning. One evening, Sarah leaned across the table and said, "Richard, you should think about putting Michael on your accounts, just in case something happened suddenly. It would make things easier forever." "Yon." I smiled faintly, nodding as though her words made sense. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice weak, my tone compliant. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Michael looked down at his plate, silent as always. That night, when they left, I locked the door behind them and allowed myself the first real smile I'd had in months. They thought I was handing them the keys to my life. What I was really doing was baiting the hook, and soon they would bite. The change in their tone was almost immediate. My act was working. They saw me as frail, compliant, slipping into the final chapter of my life, and their greed came bubbling to the surface. Sarah no longer tried to hide her intentions. One evening, as she wandered through my living room, she trailed her hand across the mantel, looking at the photos of Michael as a child. She chuckled and said, "These will look so different once we redecorate. I'm thinking modern, maybe all white walls. This old look is just depressing." I felt my chest tighten, but I only nodded. "Maybe you're right," I said softly, jotting the date and her exact words into my notebook later that night. Another time, they cornered me at the dining table. Michael cleared his throat, his eyes darting nervously to Sarah before he spoke. "Dad, we were wondering, have you thought about what will happen with the house? You know, when you're not around anymore?" His voice cracked slightly, as if even he felt the weight of what he was asking. Sarah cut in smoothly, her smile sharp. "It would make sense for us to take it. You wouldn't want it to fall into the wrong hands, would you? Family should keep it in the family." I looked at them both, my face calm, hiding the storm inside me. "That makes sense," I murmured. Yes, family should keep it in the family. Sarah's eyes glittered with triumph. Michael let out a shaky breath of relief, and I sat there, the picture of a weary old man, while inside I was already planning how to use their words against them. Their hints turned into nudges, their nudges into demands. "Richard, you should really put Michael on your accounts," Sarah said one evening. "It would save so much time when the inevitable happens." I chuckled weakly, patting Michael's hand. "You've always been responsible. I trust you." The lie slid off my tongue smoothly, and the recorder hidden under the table caught every word of their greedy push. Each visit gave me more. Every careless remark, every suggestion dripping with entitlement, became fuel for the fire I was building. At night, when the house was silent, I sat with my notebook, flipping through page after page. The story was writing itself. Two people so blinded by greed they couldn't see the trap closing around them. And I knew then, as clearly as I knew my own name, that they were walking straight into the jaws I had set. It happened on a Saturday evening. I had invited them over for dinner, though by then I knew better than to expect warmth. I cooked roast beef, mashed potatoes, and corn, meals Michael had loved as a boy. I set the table neatly, polishing the silverware, forcing myself to believe maybe, just maybe, the food might soften them. But Sarah barely touched her plate. She pushed the corn around with her fork, and then set it down with an exaggerated sigh. "Richard," she began, her tone slow and deliberate, "we really need to talk seriously about the future." Michael shifted in his chair, eyes fixed on his plate. I placed my fork down and waited. "The house," she continued. "It's time you stopped dragging your feet. Michael and I should be on the deed now. That way there won't be any messy paperwork later. Everything will already be in order." Michael cleared his throat, his voice small. "Dad, maybe she's right. It would just make things easier." I felt my pulse hammering in my temples. For months I had listened to their hints, their sly comments, their greedy laughter. But now the mask was gone. Now they were demanding it outright, as if I owed them the very roof over my head. I looked at my son. "Michael," I said slowly, "this is my home. I built this life with your mother. Do you understand what you're asking me to give away?" He finally met my eyes, but his were hollow, ashamed, and still he whispered, "It's not like that, Dad. We're just planning ahead." Sarah leaned forward, her smile cruel. "Planning ahead? Richard, you're old. You've had your time. Why cling to things you can't enjoy anymore? Let us take care of it. Let us take care of you." Those last words dripped with venom, and I felt something inside me snap. I laughed, quietly at first, then louder, startling them both. "Take care of me?" I repeated, my voice sharp as broken glass. "You've done nothing but take. Rent, furniture, food, money, my love, my trust, my pride. And now you want my house?" Michael flinched, but Sarah only crossed her arms, unshaken. "If you really loved your son, you'd secure his future. Isn't that what fathers do?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from rage, from clarity. I stood slowly, leaning on the table, my eyes locked on Michael's. "You think I'm weak, you think I'm blind, but I've seen everything. I've heard everything, and this—" I tapped the table sharply. "This is the last time you'll ever sit in my house and ask me to sign away my life." Sarah smirked, but her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Michael swallowed hard. And in that moment, I knew, the time for playing weak was over. The trap was ready. The Monday after that dinner, I walked into my lawyer's office with my notebook clutched tight under my arm. Page after page of dates, words, and moments were written in my careful hand. The story of how my only son and his wife had tried to strip me bare while I was still breathing. My lawyer spread the evidence across his desk, copies of my bank statements, notes of Sarah's comments, even recordings I had hidden around the house. His eyes narrowed as he scanned each piece, and finally he said, "Richard, this is more than enough. Let's show them what happens when greed blinds you." The process moved swiftly. Letters were filed, documents were drawn, and soon Misha. Elle and Sarah received summons they hadn't expected. They came to court smug, Sarah in a sharp dress, Michael in a suit that didn't fit right. She looked around as if she owned the place, her chin high, her hand gripping his arm like a leash. But then the evidence began to unfold. The first recording played for the judge, Sarah's voice, clear as day, saying, "Richard, you're old. You've had your time. Why cling to things you can't enjoy anymore? Let us take care of it." The courtroom murmured. Michael's shoulders sank. Then came the financial records, showing how much I had paid for their rent, their furniture, their food. 3 years of support, thousands of dollars spent without complaint. And after that, page after page of my handwritten notes, chronicling every cruel comment, every veiled threat, every hint about what would happen when I was gone. The prosecutor laid it out plainly. This wasn't love. This wasn't family. It was exploitation, manipulation, entitlement of the cruelest kind. Sarah's confidence began to crack. She leaned toward Michael, whispering furiously, her lips tight. Michael avoided my gaze, staring at the table in front of him like a guilty child. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, cane in hand, my voice steady. I am not a bitter old man clinging to things. I am a father who gave everything he had to his son, and in return, he and his wife tried to erase me before I was even gone. They wanted my house, my savings, my life's work, without a thought for the years of sacrifice that built it. I will not let my wife's memory, or my own dignity, be stolen by greed. The judge's gavel struck. His words were firm. The will I had rewritten was upheld as valid and untouchable. Michael and Sarah were cut out entirely, left with nothing. Their attempt to secure my house, my money, my legacy, exposed and destroyed. I looked at them one last time as the courtroom emptied. Sarah's face was pale with fury. Michael finally lifted his eyes to mine, but the son I once knew was gone. All I saw was a man broken by his own choices. News spreads fast in small towns. By the time I returned home from court, the whispers had already begun. Neighbors who once waved politely now stopped me on the street, their voices hushed with disbelief. "Richard, is it true? They really tried to take your house?" All I had to do was nod, and their eyes would widen with pity and anger. Sarah and Michael couldn't hide. Their cruelty was no longer confined to the walls of my house. It was public now, written in official documents and repeated in hushed conversations at grocery stores, barber shops, and church pews. Everywhere they went, eyes followed them. Where once people saw a young couple starting out, now they saw a pair of vultures who had circled too close to the living. Sarah hated it most of all. She had thrived on appearances, on being admired, but now when she smiled at acquaintances, the smiles weren't returned. When she posted pictures online, the comments were cold or absent. Friends drifted away. Even her own family called her out for the shame she had brought. Michael tried to keep his head down. He went to work, came home, said little, but I knew the weight on his shoulders. He couldn't escape the truth either. Every time he looked in the mirror, he had to face the man who had let greed erase his father. I walked to church one Sunday, cane tapping against the pavement, and the congregation welcomed me with warmth I hadn't felt in years. People shook my hand, patted my back, told me I had done the right thing. "You stood up for yourself, Richard. That took strength." Their words didn't heal the wound in my chest, but they stitched some of my dignity back together. Meanwhile, Sarah and Michael sat in the back pew, isolated, heads bowed. No one greeted them. No one wanted to be near them. They left quickly after the service, her heels clicking angrily against the tile. For years I had felt like the fool the old man mocked in his own home. But now the truth was laid bare for all to see. I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't been bitter. I had been betrayed, and the world finally saw them for what they were. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to gloat. Their own actions were the loudest voice, and that voice followed them everywhere. And I knew, as I watched them shrink under the weight of their shame, that this was only the beginning of their downfall. It was weeks after the court ruling when I heard the knock at my door, slow, hesitant, the kind of knock that carried shame. When I opened it, Michael stood there alone. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes bloodshot, and for the first time in years he looked like the boy I once knew, lost, scared, and desperate. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking, "can I come in?" I stepped aside, though every instinct in me screamed to leave him standing in the cold. He walked into the living room and sat on the very sofa I had bought for them years ago. He buried his face in his hands. "Dad, I made mistakes," he stammered. "I let Sarah control too much. I listened to her when I should have stood by you. I thought I was doing what was best for us, but I see now it was wrong. Please, Dad, forgive me." For a long moment I just looked at him. I wanted to see sincerity, the boy who once ran into my arms after school, the boy who once called me his hero. But all I saw was a man who had chosen greed over blood, who had let his wife mock me in my own home, who had demanded my house as if I were already buried. "Forgive you?" I finally said, my voice low. "Michael, forgiveness is for mistakes. Spilling a drink, missing a call, forgetting a birthday. Those are mistakes. But what you did wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal. Cold, deliberate betrayal." He lifted his head, tears streaking his cheeks. "I know, Dad. I hate myself for it. But please, I don't want to lose you. I'll do better. I'll change." I shook my head slowly. "You wanted me gone, Michael. You wanted me erased. You and Sarah sat in this very room and planned a life without me. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed your mother's memory, the promise I made to her to protect you. And for what? A house? A bank? Count?" He sobbed openly, his shoulders shaking. "She's gone, Dad. Sarah left me. She said I was useless now that I don't have anything. Please, I've lost everything. Don't let me lose you too." His words pierced me, but they didn't soften me. Instead, they hardened the truth I already knew. I leaned forward, my eyes burning into his. "You already lost me, Michael. The day you chose her greed over my love, you lost me, and nothing you say will ever change that." He broke then, collapsing into sobs, his voice echoing through the house. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it wide. "Go," I said coldly. "This house is no longer yours to dream about. It never will be." And with that, my son walked out of my life, not pushed, not chased, but carrying the weight of his own choices on his back. The house is quiet again now. Too quiet sometimes. I sit in my armchair, Kane resting at my side, and I think about everything that's happened. The suit still hangs in my closet, untouched, a relic of the wedding I was never invited to. The polished shoes still sit in their box. The envelope with the $1,000 gift is gone. I gave it to charity instead, where it might actually mean something. I think about my wife often. I imagine what she would say if she saw all of this. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe she'd blame me. Maybe she'd simply place her hand on mine the way she always did when the world felt too heavy, and whisper, "You did what you had to." I hope that's what she would say. I gave my son everything, my time, my money, my trust. I carried him through this life on my back, and when I was too old to carry him further, he turned on me. He and that woman looked at me not as a father, not as a man, but as a prize to be claimed, a wallet to be emptied, a house to be inherited. And when I fought back, when I refused to lie down and die quietly, their empire crumbled. Sarah is gone, her reputation in shreds. Michael wanders through life alone, marked by the shame of what he did. People cross the street when they see him. No one trusts a man who betrayed his own father. He asked me for forgiveness, begged for it, but I gave him none. Forgiveness would mean pretending it hadn't happened, pretending the knife in my back wasn't real, and I will never do that. Sometimes, when I walk through the neighborhood, I hear whispers behind me. "That's Richard, the man whose own son tried to take everything from him." They look at me, not with pity, but with respect, because I didn't let myself be erased. I didn't let betrayal win. So if you're listening to my story now, take this lesson with you. Betrayal does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it sleeps in your house, carries your blood, and when it does, you must be ready. You must protect yourself, even from the people you love most. Because betrayal is the seed of destruction, and revenge is the harvest. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, share this story, and tell me in the comments. What would you have done in my place? I'll be reading every word.